So I think we'll get ready to get going. I want to start with a moment of silence for Mrs. Cummings, victim of a senseless shooting. I don't know how many sensible shootings there are, but what a horrible tragedy. So if we could just honor her for a moment, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Lee Downing and Dallas Lister up to, they're our firefighters and volunteer firefighters, and we want to thank them for the haul tonight, but also give them an opportunity to make a pitch for bricks.
Thank you, Ross. Hey, everybody. I'm Lee Downing, if you don't know me. I'm the president here on this side of the building. We're the administrative, fundraising, community outreach volunteers that are here to help you and help Captain Lister and his crew here at the station. So I want to welcome you all here, and I'm going to just pass it right over to Dallas so that he can talk to you about the wonderful project that we have going on called Heroes Memorial Park.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming out. This is like our first big event since post-COVID and post-construction. So those of you that got to come in the front door, thank you. We have a beautiful front door now. I thank Alderman Arnett and the rest of the council for supporting this project, and it was a great investment to our community and to the facilities in general. I again, as Lee said, my name is Dallas Lister. I'm the station captain for the Eastport Station, which basically is a fancy saying I'm responsible for the operations of this firehouse and the equipment that goes out of here. So with that in mind, one of the things that we get charged with as station captains is to try to find ways to integrate and make the department better and sell the city and sell the services in a better, positive way. And one of the ideas that I had always had pressing on me was in big city fire departments, when a fireman dies or something like that, they'll rename an alleyway or a street or something after a guy that was died or something like that. And they always try to remember people. And Annapolis isn't really that kind of a big place, but I feel like there's a lot of pride in what we do and pride in the people that work here and the pride in the people that serve. And so I've tried it started hitting in my head, what can we do to bring this community together and remember some of our people, both that are the firemen and the police officers that work for you guys and work with me, but your heroes and your people. And so Gary, who used to be the president here, he coordinated a bunch of daytime events with like school kid drop-offs in the front yard and walk to school days and lots of cool things that brought the community into our neighborhood. And I thought, man, how do we make it better? Because the worn out foot trails and the worn out grass and the trash blowing around and things just kind of not gelling in a way that really feels like Eastport. I look at the houses as I come down Bay Ridge Avenue. I look at the work that's going on in the commercial stuff. So we came up with a plan, long story short, not to take Ross's time off, but
We're almost done.
we wanted to take the opportunity to integrate a brand new park that embraces our community at this site. And so we got to get involved with the design part of it. And so the part of the design feature is we recognize and memorialize our firefighters that have passed, both somewhat in the line of duty as well as just heroes of the day kind of thing. And we also give the opportunity for the community to buy in to the park itself, because we're trying to do this as a collaboration with the city and with the volunteers and the union that represents the firemen that work here, without putting a tax burden on the community itself. So this is kind of like a voluntary tax, if you want to call it, but you get a memorialization for the rest of eternity on a brick with your name, your family name, whomever you want. So that said, we have lots of events coming up. We had our first event at Heroes Pub, which was a kind of a rollout. We have another event coming up at Davis's Pub. We got another one coming up at Boatyard. Forward Brewing is working on a project for us to do a specialized beer just on tap in recognition of the park and the program. So we're really engaging the community, and we're trying to build and hype these things up and fortify community involvement so that you guys want to be here. people that go to Vin have a place to sit when they're waiting in line for 17 days to get in because the pizza's so good. You know, it's like, we need these things. The kids want a place to hang out waiting for the walk to the school. We need things like this, and this is an opportunity, a safe, well-lit place that's organized, and it brings it all together. So those of you that are interested can reach out. There's websites here that you can get further information. We have sample bricks in the back with QR codes. You can just take your phone and hold your camera above it, and it'll automatically pop up to the page that you need, and you can fill it in later or do whatever, and it'll do everything from how many letters you can have per line to your credit card information to however you want to do it. And we have kind of some cool stuff worked out. And then anybody that has a red shirt on that's one of the volunteers in the organization, tap them anytime you can.
Don't forget Harold back there who decided to go blue.
Yeah, sorry. So
One more thing.
that's what I have for you.
Okay, one more thing. I just want to emphasize this for this part, that, you mean I'm not loud enough? This park is a thing that Dallas came up with, and I think it's a beautiful idea, but really it's a lasting legacy to honor your hero too. I have a brick, it's got my dad's name on it. He passed away a year ago. The last thing he did was do our fire prevention day right here with me. So his brick is going to be out there. But he's not a firefighter. He was just an average Joe. So remember, honor your hero. Also, because it's coming through Eastport, it is a Annapolis Fire Department project that we are helping with, that EBFC is helping with. It is a tax write-off. So your brick becomes tax write-off, and there's a little extra added bonus to that. Again, you can ask any of us. Jeff is in the back, I'm here, Rod is here, Harold is here from EBFC, and we're happy to help you. If not, those bricks are over there. Dallas, thank you. Ross, thank you for the time.
You're quite welcome. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to invite up Lynn and Sonia from Action Annapolis to tell you some things that they're doing for the election. But before that, I want to give a personal thank you to Dan Letterberg, who had his staff person put up my banners over at the shopping center. I really did appreciate it. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. For those of you who don't know Action Annapolis, we formed in early 2017, right before the city elections, and we've been focused on We've been focused on engaging voters and on expanding the voting base. So what we try to do is bring voters and candidates together. We've done this in two ways. One is by hosting events that provide information on important local issues, whether they be affordable housing or eviction prevention, immigration, and so on. And the other is connecting candidates with the communities, especially in communities that are often underrepresented and have the lowest voter turnout. We want people to get to know who the candidates are and what kinds of decisions the candidates will be making. We know that the more involved people are with the elections, the more power they have to influence candidates after the election on the issues that impact their daily lives. We hear a lot these days on the national scene about engaging voters. Action Annapolis is trying to help build community from the ground up, help build power and influence from our neighborhoods and communities. So starting with the most local of all elections, the city council election that's happening next fall. So we know the city council makes decisions on both long and short-term priorities, and we really do believe that those decisions should be in the hands of residents in every neighborhood in each of the 8 city wards. We want voters to hold our elected officials accountable to the promises they make, and that's really the beauty of local politics. Just a little background, in the 2017 city primary election, there were 25,512 registered voters, and 9,523 votes were cast. So that's about 27%. Turnout was a lot lower in a number of precincts down to like 13 and 14%. So we can really do better. This year, the primary election is on September 21st, and I think most of you may already know that you must be registered as a Republican or a Democrat in order to vote in the primary for the city election. We also know that in wards which lean heavily toward one of the two major parties, the outcome is going to be determined in the primary. So the primaries are critical, and yet they're not on most people's radar in the city. Most people don't have any idea they're happening. And we see huge opportunities for more people to have a voice in election outcomes. We're particularly interested in reaching young people and communities of color. Some good news is that this time around, there are going to be mail-in ballots sent to everybody, every registered voter. So if you or people you know have moved recently, please do urge them to update their address so they can get a ballot, and there are going to be drop boxes all over town. You can get all this information and all the details at annapolis.gov. So Action Annapolis is aiming to make it even easier for you to get to know your candidates this time around. We're creating candidate interviews with each of the candidates. And we're going to then post them on YouTube. We have a dedicated Action Annapolis channel, so you'll be able to see them hopefully at the end of the summer or mid-August to late August. We're excited in particular because we formed a partnership with Maryland Hall's outreach program, Artreach. And we're working with young filmmakers from the nonprofit Hood to Good. And our videos will be hosted by Kamasel Brown, who many of you already know as a local artist and advocate. He's incredibly talented. He did the Breonna Taylor mural at Chambers Park and the Cars Beach mural at Park Place. He's also very committed to giving back to the community. So not only will you get to know candidates in these videos, but we're also featuring a variety of community voices representing the broad range of Annapolis residents. So you'll also get to know some fellow Annapolitans that you may not know. Our plan is to distribute these videos widely, and we would ask everyone and anyone, once we have the link up, to please spread them around your network, because the bottom line is they need to be seen. So any suggestions, questions, comments, and if you want to be on our mailing list, and I promise you we have very few emails, you don't need to worry, please write us at info@actionannapolis.com. A couple of important dates, just for your information. July 26th is the deadline for filing as a candidate for the city election, so we'll know after that date exactly who's running. August 16th is a deadline to change your address or name or party affiliation for the primary, and then September 21 is the primary. October 4th is the deadline to change your address and party affiliation for the general, and the general is on November 2nd. So you can join our Facebook group, and we can keep you posted and kind of tease out some of these videos that I think you're going to enjoy when they're done. So thank you.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you for all the good work you've done and are about to do. So there's lots of stuff to talk about. I'm going to read quickly the major categories and then start in, but please feel free to interrupt with questions. I've asked my sister, Mary Ann Arnett, to give me the high sign when it seems like things are dragging on, and we are going to really try to get through a lot of information quickly, because I do want to leave time for your questions and concerns. So the issues I'm going to be talking about are what I call street issues. These are what I advertised in the announcement, which are traffic, speeding, and parking, which I believe are interrelated, but also have their own complications. Police reform legislation, which is quite topical, and the council is working on that. A number of topics under land use and development, and a topic on environmental resiliency. So I'm going to launch into street issues, and we are going to have a presentation in a couple of slides from Cardi Templeton to talk about the ad hoc parking committee, where it is now. But starting out with traffic, and I'm going to go very quickly here, it does seem like it's on the increase, but it's hard to figure out why. We don't have a lot of new development. Maybe people are coming through Ward 8 instead of going downtown, but it is worth your life to make a turn off of any one of the side streets. I've been talking with the city manager, and I wish I was talking with the Public Works traffic engineer, but we don't have one, but talking about more signalizing of intersections and so forth. Speeding is another issue that I hear a lot about from you. I think, again, more signals will help. We talked with the city manager last week about things like speed bumps. He's resisting speed bumps because of snow plowing, fire equipment going over the speed bumps, plus unless they're very close together, which they are in DC where my son lives, people tend to speed up between the bumps and then slow down at the bump and then speed up again. But he did promise that he's going to start doing speed monitoring in the community. They apparently have gotten some additional equipment, so you're going to be seeing the speed measuring tubes starting with Boucher, but he committed to the East Board president in our meeting last week that he's going to do it throughout the community. There are some other things you can do about speeding, like planing blue lines along the traffic lanes, which make them seem narrower. And so we talked about that. That's a pretty low-cost solution. Parking, and I think, by the way, speed, traffic, and parking are interrelated with each other. The more parking we have on the streets, the slower you have to go because you're doing the eastbound shuffle, trying to weave in and out. Less parking, the faster people can go. But the interrelationship in the parking is between the residents who live here, the businesses who are located here, and the people who come to visit not only the businesses, but also to do their boating and things like that. So solutions, and Vic and I were talking about one by email today, for one group don't necessarily work for the other two groups. So we're going to really have to work on coming up with a solution. Right now we have status quo. We know what that is. Another thing that has been strongly urged is to consideration of residential permit parking, like they have downtown. They have 5 parking districts. That is certainly something that can be done. It is not done without cost. You have to pay for your permits, and for each additional car you have to pay more and more. But more importantly, no signage, no permits are really going to accomplish anything if we don't have enforcement. So I talked to the SP Plus people about what if we had 1 or 2 more residential districts over here in Eastport, and he admitted this is just a wild guesstimate, be $150,000 because they have to pay the staff continuously to monitor, and they're going to have to buy more of the vehicles that go out through and sense where you're parked and whether or not you have a permit. So there is not money in the budget to do that now, but there is potential for money, and we're going to have to figure out how we get a consensus in Ward 8 for permit parking or not permit parking. Some ancillary things, permit parking, you can have your permits, you can have guest tags that you can get up to a certain number. After that, you have to buy more. Businesses can also get hang tags. The people who can't get hang tags necessarily are the people who come here, like I did for many years from Columbia, Maryland, to go out on a 10-day cruise on my boat. And the marina I was at, Bobby Muller's, didn't have any parking. So we're going to have to worry about how we interfere with those kinds of activities. Now, all of these things can be worked out, but it is going to have to be sorted out, and it's not going to be easy. So at this point, I would like Cardi Templeton to come up. She was the chair of our ad hoc parking committee, and I want her to report on that. That was done in 2018. And Cardi, if you can come up and give us some summary remarks about the report and what's happening now, I'd very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cardi Templeton. If I haven't met you, hi. I got to chair an ad hoc parking committee mostly in the summer of 2018. There were 18 of us, I think, about a third residents of Eastport, a third business owners whose businesses were in Eastport, and a third of the people who were both. And we had a real wide variety of opinions on how much of a parking problem there was, where it was, and how to work through it. And we came up with a report of 13 recommendations. And it went to the city, and it was responded to. And then there was about a year's worth of the presidents of the Civic and Business Association and Ross trying to work with the city to get perhaps a little bit more action on their part. Then, I am getting somewhere with this, March 6th of last year, somebody convinced me as the head of the parking committee to go in and meet with David Jarrell, who was then the city manager. And he invited the head of transportation and the head of public works, and we had a great meeting. We sort of started with, here were the 13 recommendations, let's work through what they mean, and let's see what we can do. And we set another meeting for a month later. And the world kind of turned upside down for all of us. So fast forward to this March, when in February-ish we all started clearing our heads a little bit. We set another meeting for March 26th. We had that. We had a follow-up meeting April 23rd, and we're due to have another one soon. The short version, I know I've been going on already, is that we're working through these requests one by one, and the reason to do that is that they were ordered in a priority order based on the task force members voting on them. And if you want to look at the original report, it's on the ECA website, as is, I think, the original city response.
It looks like that.
And it looks like this. Yeah. When we didn't bind it.
No,
It's very fancy. First request, which tied for number one, was to install public parking signs outside of Annapolis City Marina so that people who were driving through would know that it was available public parking. That has been done. They've been up for a while. They started small, they got bigger. Related to that was to get the Annapolis City Marina public parking included in the list of public parking garages that you can get from the city website when you go to the city website and you say, how do I park here? That piece the city is still working on. They've requested the critical information from the Annapolis City Marina folks, and then we'll get it up on the website. Interestingly, the former Lowe's Hotel, now I suppose the Graduate, right, is another example of a private parking garage that has public parking available. So this was not going to be the only one. There was an easy example. Tied for number one, or number two, if you will, was to install 48-hour parking signage, because we probably collectively all think that unless you are a city resident, you can't park on the street in Eastport for more than 48 hours. So we've been working through that. The spoiler on that is that without a parking district of some sort as designated by code, no enforcement is possible. So you can put up signs, but you're not going to be able to see whether the signs themselves make enough of a difference So we talked about doing some sample signs over an area and then doing some enforcement the month after and doing comparisons so we could actually get some data to see how important the enforcement was. But by conversation and email with the Office of Law, we've determined that without a parking district, you can't do any enforcement and you actually can't even put warnings up. So that's not necessarily bad, because one of the task force recommendations was to start the process of understanding which consultants out there in the world could help us with figuring out a parking permit district process that was appropriate to Eastport, right? Many of the ones we've seen out there in the world are for residents who live near businesses where there are public parking garages, be they municipal or with big high rises, right? So the thought there is the businesses and their customers park in the garages and the residents get the streets. But we here in Eastport have a different way of doing things, which we love, and which involves us all, sharing in that and trying to figure out which of the visitors, be they visitors long-term for someone who lives here, or visitors shorter-term for a business, or visitors to a restaurant, right, or a pirate ship. So I think the next step there will be to go to, a little further down the recommendations, and we were just about to discuss that one at the next meeting, actually, to say how can we start figuring out who in the wide world has done this before so that we can stand on the shoulders of giants. Because I think what we have across the bridge, while maybe appropriate there, we don't have the underlying elements we need in Eastport for that. That said, I would like to tell you that the city has been super, super responsive in my meetings. So I've now seen Public Works has a whole map of the whole of Eastport. They've gone out and counted how many corners we have. They have talked to me about how enforcement would happen. They are committed to repainting the red lines for the no parking. We had a conversation about how to enforce, especially at the corners for safety vehicles and towing if you're parked at a red curb. And they made the good suggestion that signs that say no parking here to corner are actually a much better approach than the red curbs for a couple of reasons. Number one, when there's leaves and snow, you can still see them. Number two, they don't require nearly as much maintenance, so you're not out every year painting them. Number three, they're easier on enforcement so that the vehicles driving by and the people in the vehicles providing the tickets or warnings can see them. So they are working on that. That was clearly going to be part of a July 1 budget, not last year's. But you probably have seen the red curbs being refreshed recently as well. So in due course, you'll see signs saying no parking here to corner, not in the middle of the block where we've got people's driveways, because otherwise we'd have signs everywhere, right? Third request was to step up enforcement. So again, we had the conversation about how to get SP Plus over here. Could they do some sample enforcement for a month of particular streets and see if they could help give us some data about what's going on? And they're happy to do that, but the 48-hour parking signs aren't something that we can enforce. So we're a little bit on hold with that one. Request 4 is more in the parking task force lap. That one is to look into the availability of commercial parking in what are currently non-commercial lots. Right now, for example, churches aren't legally allowed to rent their spaces during times when they wouldn't use them in order, for example, for a restaurant's employees to park there. So step 1 there is to talk with the folks who own those lots and say, would you be interested? If so, what kind of insurance would you need and what kind of liability coverage would you want? And if we find that there are some who are interested in doing that, then the other side of that is to go and see if there's demand, right? So talk to the business owners who might be interested and say, gee, is this 4 blocks away too far? How much would you pay? And see if we can find a match. And if so, then we would go to Ross and say, would you please put in some legislation to make that legal? I could go on, because there are 13, but perhaps you've heard enough from me now. Okay, number 5, traffic control during special events. So we had some suggestions on signage, on cleanup of signage, on what roads should have parking on only one side, about how to be careful around curbs so that emergency vehicles could always go through, and also about timing of the lights and encouraging people to leave the peninsula in one direction and keep moving. So subsequent to that, there were some changes made to the big public events, so Blue Angels, July 4th, etc., in 2019. And I don't know if it worked better, because I've sort of asked and I wasn't here for it. So we got that list again and of course last year there weren't any big public events with parking to worry about or traffic to worry about because we were all wearing masks and staying 6 feet away from each other. So for the Blue Angels, the Annapolis Police Department gave David Gerald, who gave me the list of what they were planning that they had done in 2019, and I sent that around to several people to get comments to see if there's any additional or revisions. Those went back and that happened, so I now need to go back and ask the folks how it worked and what worked well enough and what didn't work well enough so that we can try and adjust that. So if you would please, this coming weekend, especially on Saturday night, unless the weather's bad, in which case Sunday night, if you're at all interested and you like data, like I do, sit on your front porch, right? And just sort of see how long is the traffic stalled or how long does it take for things to get moving. Because that would be super, super helpful to have that data so that as we make changes, we can compare and see how it works. Request 6, I think, we got through 5 with our meetings. 6 was going to be next, and that was, again, to look out in the wide world for people who have done parking districts that might factor in residential and business and lack of structured parking and I won't call them long-term visitors, but, because a house guest after 3 days, something about that. Request number 7 would be 48-hour parking. We were looking at considering changing that law to be allowed for Eastport residents only. That's back to parking districts, which again is back to 6. Refreshing the white L's at the red curbs. Do you know what I mean by the white L's painted on, to try to encourage people to realize here's where the end of the space is. Don't leave 5 feet. Space dividers, again, it was a conversation with public transportation about whether putting dividers to actually demarcate particular spaces. Their research shows that ends up with fewer parking spaces than if you let people work their way in and out, because some people have shorter cars, some people have longer cars. And then there was no parking signs, please post them 7 days in advance of special events, etc. Yes?
I may be wrong in this, but I remember when this report was originally given that the study said that we could get 30% more parking spaces, if you divided, the street up into parking spots as opposed to allowing people to park wherever they wanted to and leave a lot of space in between cars. I thought that had been reported. Am I wrong?
I'm not remembering that. But I will say, when we wrote the report, which is 50-odd pages long, I took the approach that we should capture every single thing that we ever found and stuff it all in there with a 2-page executive summary, but that the rest of that report would be fully rich with this information so that nobody would have to go dig again. So let's go look at it, because I'm not remembering that. May I? Oh, yes.
One last suggestion.
I may not leave.
Is that the red on the curbs from the intersection, I'm not sure it's long enough, because we're getting a lot of white pickup trucks that love to park right near, and so no matter how far you inch out, you've got to go far out, be able to see if it's safe to make a return, assuming you're stopping. And I think that needs to be considered, that needs to be lengthened in Eastport.
So, that, are we on the record?
Pardon?
Are we on the record?
Yes, we're being.
I understand that there is a nationwide code about how long those red curbs need to be from the corner, and it's something like 30.
Forget the nationwide.
I love it. I love that, because here's why. The nationwide code is like 30 feet or something, right?
We did that initially.
And we would lose a lot of parking if we did that. And it turns out a lot of municipalities, not just us in Eastport, don't do the full 30 feet. So one of the things when we restarted these meetings with the city, I was explicit that safety was really important. The last thing that we want to ever see again is somebody not be able to get out of Eastport fast to the hospital when they need to. And I have been reassured several times by David Gerald that the first responders, the fire department, et cetera, feel that there is enough space to get around with the red curbs where they are, and that if we really wanted to push for full regulation, we could do that, but we'd lose a lot of parking. So it's a conversation that's come up. Where we sort of left it was, if there are particular places where we sense that there's problems, let's bring those up. But it's that forever balance of. So then the question is, if the white trucks, the white pickups, are they over the red curb?
No.
They're not. Okay. Maybe what we need to do is pinpoint the couple of places you're experiencing this and double check with the fire department and make sure that they can get around. And then if that's a yes, then who else needs to get around, and do we need to make some adjustments in that location?
Just saying.
Let's.
Has that happened yet? Is it going to happen? Somebody who lives in Eastport, maybe was on the committee, but a citizen resident representative in those meetings, is that going to happen?
You know what? Yours is the first request I've heard from that. I would be happy to have somebody else doing these meetings with David Gerald. The reason that I was asked was because I was the chair of the committee. The one thought at the time was, gee, should we have the head of the civic and the business associations both go? Or do you... I am neutral in that I think there's a lot of ways to do it. So why don't we hear what David would like? I do think it's very important to present, if we're going through the task force recommendations, to go through them in the way in which they came to be.
Understood.
As opposed to anyone saying, well, gee, if I'd been on the task force, this would have been number 1 or 2. So I just think we need, if those are the conversations we're having, stick to the report. If we're not talking about the report and we want to be having individual resident conversations with David Gerald, or there wants to be another group that gathers, that's fine too. I mean, I'm not trying to stand in the way of it.
He told us that he wanted to include somebody.
Right.
So just circle back with him.
Sure. And you know what, maybe the answer is we have a business person and a resident, since if it's if it's the task force, right, and it doesn't need to be me. It would be okay. Yes?
Hi, I wanted just one sort of along what he's saying in terms of citizen. Is there going to be an opportunity for people to give their opinions? Like what the gentleman in the front was saying, and he's gone to the restroom now, and I get it all the time. I drive an Expedition, and I have a hard time seeing who's coming, and I'm a tall car, right? So fire trucks can make the left or right turn because they're really tall and they can see. But even in I had an Expedition, I really don't, but it's really hard to see. And I think that maybe the issue is not so much the red curb lines, but stop signs, right? If you know that the people coming at you are gonna stop at the stop sign, then you have more, you don't have to. So when I'm coming up 2nd Street or 3rd Street, for example, and I'm coming up to go towards Chesapeake, when I'm down on, in the numbered street, I come up there, if there are big trucks, which there usually are, parked at the very first spot on either side and on this side, you really can't see the cars coming this way until you are in the middle of the intersection. You really can't. So while more parking, more red line back this way and this way might help, and probably will help because it does also take away the parking, maybe the option there, maybe it's not just a parking solution, maybe it's also a traffic management, like a stop sign. Because if I'm not worried that the people going this way are gonna crash into my car, then I don't mind, I'm more, it's just safer for everybody.
Is the place that you're thinking, does it have stop signs now and they're just not very visible? Or is it a place without stop signs?
It has stop signs for the numbered streets, but not for Chesapeake Avenue. or
So you're
Chesapeake.
thinking maybe add stop signs to
It should
Chesapeake?
be four-way stop signs, so that everybody has to stop, so that there's no, there's no like, okay, I'm gonna go for it and hope that I don't get smacked, which is pretty much what I do every time I leave one of those streets.
So that,
Yes.
so that's why, and I breezed over it on the traffic, that's why I think we need to think about stops at every intersection, four-way stops. And that will give you some assurance, but again, that's something that should be done by experts, and we have not hired a traffic engineer. And in fact, it was specifically taken out of the city budget this year. I was the lone vote against that. But we need to bring to bear some expertise, and then we also get input from the people that are affected. Yes, sir, and then I think we need to move on.
I just want one comment, and that is, we live in Eastport, and Eastport's got a traffic problem, we'll always have a traffic problem. I never go onto Chesapeake other than from a street that has a stop sign, okay? I mean, it's a pretty simple solution. I don't mean to minimize your problems, okay? But you know where the stop signs are on Chesapeake if you go out on the proper streets that have stop signs, four-way stops. You've got what you want without having to have lots of stop signs everywhere. That's loose and simple.
In closing, let me just say, my meetings with the city are meant to represent the recommendations of the ad hoc task force that was in 18. It may well be that there are new ideas or other things that to be considered. If you've got questions or particular issues, would you please email either the Business Association president or the Civic Association president, and they'll get them to me. What I will do is gather them and catalog them. It is not my place to factor them into the recommendations of the original task force, and right now the task force is not active. I am carrying those recommendations forward, but I'd be happy to capture them, right, and ask the questions, and then somebody can decide whether the task force needs to reconvene or a different group needs to reconvene, or whether moving through these recommendations will get us far enough or what. I do own a business in Eastport, but I want to reassure you that I am doing this as the chair and neutral, presenting what was agreed upon. And that's where we are so far.
Thank you, Cardi. Cardi has done a wonderful job. Can we give her a round? Yes. I might not be able to do anything else well, but I can pick chairs very well. And Cardi has served us all very well. So I have several more slides that subset, but I think we've really covered these street issues. Suffice it to say, it is complicated, it is interconnected, and there are going to be, no matter what solution we go to, there will still be winners and losers. We just need to try to minimize that amount of distress on the part of people. And as Cardi said, David Jarrell is a wonderful city manager, and he's very responsive. Also, Mike Johnson, our new head of Public Works, we were very lucky to find him. He's very qualified, and he also is very responsive. So going from one nightmare, traffic and parking and speeding, to another, which is gun violence. And the recent uptick in gunfire, really all over the country, but certainly here in Annapolis, and especially near the President Street area. I don't want to get Jess going, but she's been telling us for years that something like the other night was going to happen. And unfortunately, is going to happen again, because you just cannot have that much firepower on the street with people firing indiscriminately and not get people hurt. Now, contrary to some of the things that seem to be popular opinion, the city has not cut back on the police budget. And in fact, it got a significant increase again this year in the budget. What we do have, though, is a problem that we don't have enough sworn officers in the police department. So at a closed meeting of the city council on Thursday, we were going over this, and one of the members called for a war on guns, which is easy to say, but I pointed out you can't really go to war if you don't have the troops. We're down to 98 sworn officers out of the authorized 124. And the reason we're down is because policing is less and less attractive, but also our officers are being recruited away by other municipalities that are offering signing bonuses that are quite attractive. And I think we need to take a bold step forward and offer a really big signing bonus. I'm working with the chief of police and the finance director, but I think we should be offering a $50,000 signing bonus that is incremented, $5,000 when you sign, $20,000 when you pass probation, and another $25,000 when you've served for 5 years. Now that is a lot of money. It's over $1 million for the vacancies we have. But if we don't have police out, there's a lot of other factors that are going into this gun violence, including the incredible easy way of getting guns. But if we're not even filling our ranks, I don't see how we can expect to address this. So I will offer that as an open question for comments, but it is clear we have to take some pretty aggressive action. Yes, sir.
From what I've learned from my time being down south and everything, I'm not quite sure how it is here, but the issue very much isn't just guns and everything, just because like, you can have 40 guns sitting on the floor right here, not gonna hurt a single soul. It's, I would almost say, kind of the opposite issue that we're having, where people who would go buy their guns legally and everything are either having to go get them illegally or build their own or things like that, just because the laws are getting so kind of weird. Just recently I went to go buy myself a 1911. The cost for just the handgun license, or I don't think it's the HQL, but the transfer fee was like $140. Meanwhile, the cheapest gun in the gun store was $130. Why are we paying the city more money to buy something that costs cheaper than the actual firearm? And part of me, when I was looking at it and thinking about it, just what really contributes to gun violence more than just a bunch of people running around with guns? Because I'm looking at my old hometown, gun. You can count like 20 people in any random spot and probably someone there has a gun. Yet the crime wasn't there. And what I've learned over the years is the real thing to help gun violence is deterrence more than just, well, we just gotta ban them, because you're not gonna ban them. If someone can get a nail and a piece of pipe, there you go, you got a slam fire shotgun right there. They are very much fundamentally impossible to ban. The one thing we need to do is get better civilians, better people to have them and everything. If you have a few guys that, like you, like me, like a good friend and all, who are strong, smart, and they know what they're doing and everything, if a criminal sees that someone has a gun on them, even if they have no ammo and no real intention to use it, even if someone's just like, give me your gun, and they'll give it to them, it's just the deterrence is more than enough. And a lot of the times, the deterrence is more than just aggressively going after people and, 3 a.m., kicking in door raids. Because that looks really good on the news and it looks very scary, but all it does is make the criminals more hardened to the point where if they see a cop trying to help a kid, like, get a cat out of the tree, they're thinking like, you coming for me, bang, 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 bang.
So let me respond. First of all, the city doesn't license guns. That's done at the state and federal level. But the thrust of your comment is we should all arm. I have visions of the Wild West movies that I used to watch when I was growing up. I'm not sure that's what we want. I wonder why we have to have guns at all. And to me, I would want to take guns off the street, not have no one have guns. Maybe even not even the police officers, but this proliferation of readily available guns. So let me turn, yes, you have your hand up? Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to ask, did I read correctly in the Capitol today that we have had 3 murders in Annapolis for the whole year so far?
I think that's right. Obviously the recent one, and there were 2 earlier.
Yeah, so it's not exactly Baltimore. I'm not for guns. I think it's been proven many times that it causes more problems with suicides, more problems than it prevents. But anyway, I did want to point out that the murder rate here is not exactly.
Actually, I saw an email today that said per capita we're 3 times the rate of Baltimore. So you have to look at it on a per capita basis, not an absolute number. But however many murders is too many. And it's happening way too often. It's happening that people who are not the intended target. A lot of these killings are people who know each other. They're the younger brother of someone whose other brother killed him. And that does make up a heavy amount of our murders. But the amount of indiscriminate gunfire and people feeling absolutely no compunction to not do that, and it is growing worse. And Jess has her hand up. I want to recognize her, but more guns, I don't believe is the solution.
We've already tried less guns, it's not working.
Well, we haven't gotten to less guns. We keep having more and more guns. But yes, Jess.
So I just wanted to speak to a couple things. First of all, we had a gun shootout the other night where 2 people had guns and decided to shoot them at each other. And as somebody who lives a half a block from it, it's not something that I would like to see more of, right? I don't want to see more of one person shooting and another person shooting back. I live, like I said, a half a block from where that happened. And while we may only, which is never an only, have 3 murders, I think that's more function of bad marksmanship than it is a lack of gun violence in our city. And it's not funny.
No, it's not.
Because bad marksmanship is what killed Mrs. Cummings
Yep.
on Monday night. Bad marksmanship is what made me go to my 4 children's bedroom on Sunday night at 11:15 p.m. to make sure that they were sleeping and not lying in a pool of blood in their bed from a bullet that went astray. Okay? It is not okay. None of this is okay. And it is not okay when it becomes a big thing because a horrible tragedy like what happened on Monday happened, and it's ignored all the time when it happens in our neighborhoods all the time, right? There are shootings that happen on a weekly basis here and in Robinwood and all throughout the city, not just in the poorer neighborhoods, but throughout the city. And it's not okay. And I would like to know from the city, and I know, Ross, we've talked about this, but I'd like to know what is the status of ShotSpotter? I would like to know what is the status of repairing the cameras? Because I end up having to use my Nest camera to provide evidence because the cameras that are supposed to be working across the street from my house aren't working to find the people who are shooting. Sunday night shooting, there was probably 10 to 12 kids running and biking down the street when the shooting happened. And then if you listen to my recording, you hear them scream and run the other way. Again, it is only because of luck and bad marksmanship, or just really luck, that we didn't have another tragedy on Sunday night. And for those of us who woke up on Monday morning to deal with the anniversary of our friends being murdered, this hasn't been a good week in any way for anybody. And it's something that needs to change. We can't keep saying, this is just an off, this is a one-off. We have a gun crime problem in our city. I just saw an op-ed from our mayor saying that this is not our city, that our city is a safe city. Well, I welcome anyone to come and spend a week in my house, and you tell me if you feel all the time that this is a safe city, because we have a problem, and it's a problem that needs to be solved, and we need to know what's going on with the substation that we had. In the article, and all the things about the substation that was talking about creating communications and relationships between the police. Now I'm being told the substation is only for nonprofits to be there, and the police are not going to be there. The shooting that happened on Sunday night happened next to the substation. If there were police there, would that shooting have happened? I mean, I can't say, but I'm going to guess that it would be a lot likely that somebody would pick up a gun and shot it if they knew they were next to a room with police in it. So all I'm saying is that we need to make changes.
Let me answer a couple of your status quo questions, and then I'll go to Hugh and Bill and Brian. So in terms of shots fired, our contract with BG&E, when they're replacing the street lights, they're putting them in, but the priority has been to put them near public housing. And so that's where they're going. The cameras we've added, it was almost $1 million, 960 some odd dollars, because the cameras are old and the cameras are broken, and the communications between the cameras is way outdated. So there is money in the budget to do that. In terms of staffing the resource center, I agree that is a gigantic disappointment, because we all were told that it was going to be a combination of police and our social service people, and it's not. Now, part of that is because we don't have enough police. We're down to 98, and there's not enough to go around. The night that Ms. Cummings was shot, we were understaffed. We were 2 officers under our complement, and that happened to have been a fairly well filled out shift. So the first thing, the things that we can do as a city council is to put the money in the budget to do the proper policing, to buy the cameras, to buy the technology, but most importantly, get up to strength in the officers. And if we don't do that, I mean, all these other things, the social services, I'll get to you in a minute, sir, all of those things are slow to develop. But as you said earlier, a deterrent is a visible officer. It is an officer that is visibly on patrol in your neighborhood. Let me go to Hugh, and then Bill, and then Brian, and then, you, sir.
You touched on it, Ross, concerning the numbers, the lack of filling vacancies. All right, you mentioned the idea of a incentive that's there and stuff like that. You know, I don't get quite as emotional as Jess. I do pay attention though, and we've had problems with numbers for the 15 years I've been listening to this, and we don't seem to have a real inspiration on the city council to fill those voids. So you offer an idea of an incentive or something like that. Where's the timeline with that? What's going to happen? When are we going to fill those? And I know we can go through all the concepts of we got too much training, we have too much competition, stuff like that. We matter. So the city, you as our representative, the city needs to get those spots filled and make an effort to get the programs they have said they want to. They mouthed about their programs. Get them manned up so they can actually have a chance to work.
Right. So I will say, and I'll be proud to say, we have always fully funded police. It's not for lack of funds that we don't have the ranks. I think that is a problem. We've also had an endless cycle of chiefs of police.
And that's the problem.
I agree.
Get in on that.
And
okay, you provided the money.
Right.
The money's been provided for years. Why is the city's police not paying, why is the department not paying attention to that and spending it on other things? And why does the city not have control over that?
So I truly believe it is a management problem. We have former Mayor Panelides sitting right by you, and he had a similar problem. We've been going through chiefs of police, and part of the reason is we're not getting the results that we expect and paying for. We're paying $23 million a year for police and an almost similar amount for fire, but Fire, we're getting the results. Fire is always up to staff, and police is never up to staff. Now, you tell me what ordinance I pass to make the police higher up to staff.
Get your incentive program going.
Well, I'd like to do that, and I pitched it to the mayor, and I pitched it to the closed session of the council on Thursday. One of my colleagues says, "Oh, that's just throwing money at the problem." And I said,
else you got?
I know, that is what our level of ability to do, is to legislate and to budget. And I think that the incentive program, we can't just match the other jurisdictions. It's easier to police most every place else. And so we've got to go beyond that and really come up with a significantly different, larger amount of incentive. So, Bill?
I have a different ask. Every time we deal with this question, and the request is, well, we should do this or we should do that, and even things that were decided, like this substation, to sit here over what, a year and a half later? More than that? A year and a half later to be told, this community is being told, well, there isn't going to be a police presence there. That is a failure, in my opinion, to communicate the status quo on an ongoing basis to the citizenry. That doesn't cost any money, okay? That's not a new program. The most frightening thing I would submit on gun violence is the suggestion that it is completely random, that it can happen to anybody walking down a street, any kid riding a bike, that it's random. But then we're told, it's really not random. And the fact of the matter is, it is not random. It is people who know each other. It is drug deals that go bad. It is getting even on gang warfare, that kind of stuff. Now listen, here's what I'm asking. We need to know more about the nature of the problem that we're living in, okay? So the police report needs to be, and the police chief, frankly, needs to be going around the community saying, we're down 30%. Okay, well, that's a fact, but we're all having to live with this. The second part of the question is, well, what are you doing with the other 2/3? What adjustments have you made given the current situation we're in? How are we handling the fact that we all live in a situation right now where law enforcement is hampered? Other than, and Ross, I agree with you, more needs to be spent and so forth. But that's not communicating to the citizens who are living day to day wondering, we never have these conversations until a headline, until somebody gets killed, until there's 30 shots being fired somewhere. And yet, it's an ongoing communication issue, in my opinion. It costs nothing. We need intelligence. We need to know that the substation isn't going to be what people think it's going to be. We need to know what percentage of those traffic cameras don't work today. And next month, I want to know what percentage are working. And the people that live in those neighborhoods need to know. And that's monthly, regular reporting, okay? And that has never happened. And that's my ask.
Okay, thank you. We go to Brian.
So Ross, I like your idea of offering a signing bonus to recruit officers, but something to keep in mind is retention. I mean, it costs a lot of money to retrain officers. So what are you going to do not to discourage the existing officers from saying, hey, I wasn't offered a signing bonus? And what's going to happen is you're going to have new officers come in with this signing bonus, and you're going to have the existing officers, those officers essentially surpassing some of the existing officers who don't cost as much because they're already trained. So I think you got to just keep that in mind as you develop some kind of legislation or you talk about what to do to increase the police force.
Now, you make a good point, and I talked to Rhonda McCall, the administrative head of the police department, about that, and she she raised it. I mean, we're already at over $1 million with this retention plan, which we do have the one-time only money. I don't know how many years we can continue to do that, but then you do have the problem of how do you sweeten the pot for the people you want to keep here. You're absolutely right. This gentleman in the blue shirt, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, sir.
I'm Greg.
Greg.
Just to throw something out there, it's more of a question, either or. I know that police are very important, but also crisis response teams, social workers, and in ways, because these are known individuals very frequently. Also like the community mediation program, is there anything like that being looked at?
I didn't hear the last.
The community mediation program.
Well,
Is there anything like that being looked at? That's a nonprofit that can come in and work with individuals on resolving conflicts.
we do have that through the county. It's not as robust as we need it to be, but that is the nascent new Office of Community Caring Services, which right now has 2 social workers in it, who are also supposed to be staffing the resource centers. And I want to note, Jess, you used the term, and so did you, Bill, substation. That's not what they were labeled. They were labeled community resource centers, and I think that's an entirely different concept, I know, than you were thinking we were talking about, Jess, and which what people were asking for.
They were called substations even in the capital articles about them, and the chief called it a substation.
Mhm.
Had the insignia.
But it is,
Posted on the wall of the police.
yeah, so, I thought I saw, oh, Mayor Panelides.
Thank you for having the meeting. I just want to give a couple highlights about crime, some perspective, but more importantly, some solutions that we can do. And I'll start off with the positive on the solution. So the first thing is Annapolis is a great city, and there's a lot of officers that work hard. I had a chance to meet a lot of them personally over the years, but they're overworked. And one of the things I think the city should do is ask the county and the state for help. That's one of the things we did back when I was mayor. We asked them to help out with some of the public housing unit. They have resources, staff, technology, specialized units, monitoring cell phones, dogs that can sniff out guns that the city doesn't have. And I think they're more than willing to help. I think you've seen that, the work they do in Baltimore. To Jeff's point about the cameras, Baltimore City did something, not that we want to create a police state, but they actually pay people and give a property tax credit if they install Ring and Nest doorbells in their system. And they've been used to solve a lot of crimes. And we had people that gave money to do cameras within the public housing community. But I think going back to your point, the money is a big issue to recruit officers to come in. You know as well as I do, when a fire department job comes open, they get 500 to 1,000 people apply. When the city comes in, sometimes they get nobody. And the people they do, they have to screen out. I had 3 friends personally that were police officers. None of them do it anymore. One went to the FBI, one went to the Veterans Administration, the other one did medicine. It's a hard time to be a police officer in the area. So I think take-home cars is always a big thing. It's the #1 thing they talked about. You have to be competitive with other jurisdictions. I think the pay is good for the people here, but we're all pulling from the same pot. There's not enough people coming in, and we're all basically just stealing from other departments. So I think the pay could help, but I think the biggest, most immediate thing we could do, and like I said, something positive, is ask the county and the state for help. The county executive, the governor, they have resources that we dream of having in the city. So thank you.
So thank you for that. So the administration can and does, and we do have a good set of cooperative agreements with the county. And by the way, we have our own dogs, both in police and fire. But in the budget that we just passed, we put in money to do a more global look at things that we can do with the county or be taken over by the county. And we really do need to give that some serious look. But I will tell you that the thing that I hear about going with the county is we don't want to lose our autonomy. We want to have control over our police forces, though we really do. And so we don't want to give that over to the county or many of the other services. So it sounds good when you first say it, but it's not easy to pull off and to sell. Yes?
Just to be clear, I wasn't saying merge, I just said ask them for additional.
Yeah, no, and we do have cooperative agreements with both police and fire and emergency management. I need to turn quickly. We're never going to get through this whole agenda because I will leave some time at the end for questions from you that are not on topics I brought up. But I want to quickly mention that we're working to adjust to the recently passed state police reforms. We obviously have to conform to the state law, but we're looking at things which we'd like to make even more strict than the state laws. One of the things, we just talked about the money, or lack thereof, for the recruitment bonuses. One of the things we're discovering is that the new state laws come with a large, and I mean large, amount of unfunded mandates, maybe as much as $1 million. It's not that it's worth doing, but there wasn't any budget from the state to help us do that. The other thing is that the reforms are very county-centric in terms of forming review commissions and things like that, and it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. I'd like to turn, I have several items, updates, and maybe I'll ask you to tell me which ones you want to hear about on land use and development, and then I do have something about the Maritime Task Force, but items of discussion under land use and development are the current accessory dwelling units, ancillary dwelling units, affordable housing, administrative hearing officer, community benefit agreements, housing authority, several different issues about that, the maritime zoning changes, and the Comp Plan 2040. So you can see that's a pretty heavy agenda to get over in the next 20 minutes or so to leave some time at the end. I did ask Bill Reichert to come and give us a report from the Annapolis Neck Coalition on observations they have on the current ancillary dwelling units. You're talking about the ancillary dwelling units, right?
Accessory.
Right? Yes, accessory dwelling units, yes. So,
Let me just do this quickly.
yeah.
Ask one. Take one. Just take one.
This has already been through the Planning Commission and is now coming to the City Council for a public hearing and then going to several committees.
Thanks, Ross.
Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Bill Reichart, and speaking to you tonight about pending legislation in the city regarding accessory dwelling units. It's Ordinance 0921. And I'm not going to go into this detail because we are handing out right now what is a fact sheet and issue identification sheet regarding this pending legislation. But I encourage you to pay attention to this one, among others. It's right now it's been through the Planning Commission stage, and it's going to go into committees, and then ultimately, probably end of July, I would say at this point, it's going to go to City Council. This proposed legislation is going to affect the entire city of Annapolis. What you're getting was developed by what's called the Greater Annapolis Citizens Coalition. This coalition was formed by the Eastport Civic Association, the Greater Parole Community Association, and also the Bay Ridge Civic Association. So it is the work of a number of civic associations that pay attention to planning and development issues, traffic issues, and so forth. And the purpose here is to get as much information to citizens as possible so that you can understand what's going on, get some basic facts, see some of the issues that we found. They're not the only issues, but some of the issues that we found that if this legislation passes as written, will have a fairly dramatic impact. An accessory dwelling unit is simply, in its simplest form, is another dwelling unit on an existing lot. Okay, so the clearest example of that is the granny flat over the garage. Okay. However, this legislation allows a separate dwelling, not just the granny flats, but a separate dwelling to be built on an existing lot, including residential lots, okay? It has the potential, as you read through this, and I'm not going to spend the time doing this, but this is fairly detailed and it leads you to find out additional information. But it has the potential to dramatically increase density where it is applied. There are no parking regulations under the current proposed legislation regarding this. So if, for example, your neighbor builds a separate dwelling behind his house, and people then rent from that person and bring cars to that situation, there are no regulations in the current legislation to deal with that regarding parking. There are no environmental considerations, and one of the most important factors we've identified here is enforcement. I'll just mention briefly, the city at this time, admittedly, okay, we've met with the city planning and zoning, we've met and tried to do our research on this. They do not have any idea at this point how many accessory dwelling units, unregulated, exist right now. Okay. And they do exist. We get reports I see people shaking their heads. You just walk down your street. Okay, you know where they are. Okay. They are, in many respects, unregulated, not grandfathered. Here's the problem. There is no specific enforcement provisions written into this current legislation. None. Okay. And our position would be that they should be in there, that the city should have a mechanism to enforce any new legislation. And we also make the suggestion to the city that you better know how many you already have and need to bring up to code standards before you start enforcing things that are allowed anew. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. Hope I've got your interest. It's percolating through City Council. You'll see some of the issues and facts here. So I'll tell you what, in the interest of time, I'm not going to take any questions about this. I'll be around, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for the work. Thank you for the work that the coalition is doing. Some of the things that the Planning Commission reported on, I'll get to you in a second. They suggested dropping the prohibition against short-term rentals for owner-occupied accessory dwelling units properties. I don't know what is a non-owner occupied, but they suggested dropping it, which I think means dropping it in total, and also dropping the requirement for an additional off-street parking slot to accompany the new unit. So one question, and then we really do have to fly.
Very quickly, Action Annapolis has 2 videos you can watch about accessory dwelling units. It's really good information about nationally what's going on. The state of Maine has just not only legalized it, has made all accessory dwelling units by right in the entire state. Los Angeles, San Diego, San Jose, Minneapolis, and other cities have made them by right on there. So, but with that said, just want to say one thing about this. It's not a flood. What happens is that they trickle in because they're very expensive to build. They're very, very expensive. A minimum of probably about $100,000 up to about $300,000.
Yep.
Just to kind of put some context that it will happen, but it won't be a flood.
So accessory dwelling, I have one in my house. My son forgot to register for his dorm one semester, so we quickly enclosed a screened-in porch and put a bathroom there. But we didn't rent it to him. And it's only when the accessory dwelling unit switches to a rental property that the city even has any say over what's going on there. But as Bill said, it's working its way through. It's been to the Planning Commission, and it's going to have a public hearing possibly at the meeting on July 12th, if not the meeting on July 26th.
What's your position
On the accessory dwelling use, I think that
on this legislation?
I think that we need to enforce it, and I don't think we are, and I don't think we're enforcing short-term rentals. Again, and Susan Margolis and I can have a conversation about this, but I don't even think we know how many short-term rental units we have.
That's not
So,
true. That's not
well, I'm sorry, I have,
I own one, and we're highly enforced. And
if,
we registered, we got the
all right,
license.
I won't get into a debate, but I know that the city does not know how many there are, because there are a lot of them that they have not applied and gotten their license. Will?
Can we have an amnesty for existing ADUs so that we can have an open conversation about it? Because I know about dozens of them, and these people do not want to come out and talk with you if they're going to be found as criminal and ordered, as I was, to say, you're going to have to destroy your existing ADU that you bought with your house in order to use it for any legal purpose.
I mean, that's an amendment that could be offered, yeah. So,
Can we expect such an amendment or something to be forthcoming from yourself as an alderperson?
not at this point, no.
So, if
We-
you're
we-
saying
first we
that
need to
you
know-
don't want to have an open conversation with these owners.
First, we need to know how many of them they are and where they are.
So we would need.
Just like we did
to get that.
with short-term rental
Right.
units.
So if you're setting up a catch-22 where we can't find that out because these people can't come out of the closet, then how can you have that conversation?
Yeah.
All right,
Do you want to know?
pardon? Yeah, we do, we have to
No, they
know.
just want
Jackie?
to bully us.
Jackie Wells?
I think it's important to note that the current code of Annapolis disallows accessory dwelling units unless you were one that existed at the time that that law was put in place, which are the grandfathered ones. Otherwise, it's against the law. So, you know, for all the people who are doing ADUs, you are against the law right now. What is in front of you on this piece of paper is a proposal to make every lot across all of Annapolis, almost every lot will be eligible to have not single-family dwelling, but dual-family dwelling. That's a huge amount of density that can increase. And I hear all about oh, it'll only come in a trickle. Every jurisdiction that's listed and mentioned is not on a peninsula. All those jurisdictions that have them in place, I've lived in some of those jurisdictions and I've seen the impact of increasing density without having the infrastructure and the enforcement mechanism in place. So I wouldn't buy the whole, you know, rah-rah, it's okay, and oh, we want to protect these people who are doing something illegal so that they can come out and talk about it. You know, follow the code. And the code may change with this piece of legislation, but the point of this piece of paper is to educate everybody so that they then turn around and whatever your opinion is, pro or against or in between, write to your alderperson and give them your opinion.
And the older persons are on that sheet of paper. I'm going to move on because there's three pieces of legislation I need to talk to you about very quickly, and then leave time for questions and answers, open mic. I have introduced a piece of legislation, administrative hearing officer. This is an officer who will hear on the record major site design applications. It basically takes that administrative function from the planning and zoning staff and gives it to this administrative hearing officer. The administrative hearing officer has a set of qualifications. The administrative hearing officer will be reporting to the city manager, not to planning and zoning, not to the Office of Law. The hearings will be open. The planning staff will make a recommendation on the application, just as they do now. The applicant will make their case, and then anyone who wishes to testify that has standing will make their case. The administrative hearing officer will create a record and make an approval or rejection of the plan, which is then appealable to the City Board of Appeals. So we have a stream of processing now. We earlier introduced a pre-application meeting where the applicant needs to come to the community before they put in their application to tell them about a major project that is being planned. That is something that will allow the community to know at the same time everybody else is. We've added to this with this new legislation, I hadn't added yet because it hasn't been passed, a community benefit agreement, which is an additional process at the time of application where the alderperson of the ward or alderpersons, if it spans more than one ward, will form a committee to meet with the applicant to discuss the impacts of the application on the community and discuss benefit agreements that could be used to mitigate those applications. Let me get a drink of water here. The committee that the alderperson appoints should be a representative group. It could be made up of citizens and/or businesses. And the CBA, if any agreement is reached, would travel with the application. There are some updates on the Housing Authority, but we don't have time, so I just want to let you know the status of the Maritime Task Force and subsequent legislation. The task force is finished. It has made its recommendations in an executive report, presumably to be followed with a more detailed report. An ordinance has been introduced that calls for some significant changes in the WMI, the Waterfront Maritime Industrial, which is on the other side of Back Creek, the WME, which surrounds Spa Creek on the Ward 8 side and is interrupted by the WMM, which is from the bridge down to Severn Sailing School and includes the Annapolis City Marina and WP Nautical, amongst other buildings. So that will be going to the Planning Commission and also to the Maritime Advisory Board. They will be making recommendations to the City Council. That will be up for a public hearing at a City Council meeting and then sent at this point to the Rules and City Government Committee. Last update that I have here is on the Comp Plan 2040, which is the next comprehensive plan. It's moving forward. The first full draft of that should be available in early fall. The plan is calling for form-based zoning and some specific redevelopment in, I think, now 5 locations. It will also call for some significant changes from the last comp plan. And then the last thing I have on the slides that we're running through quickly is the state passed legislation to allow counties and municipalities to establish resiliency funding authorities. The county council and the city council are working on this together. The county council has already passed their legislation to establish their part of the resiliency authority. The city council has gotten it, and I believe we had a public hearing with no comments at the last council meeting, so it'll now go to committees, which are Rules Committee and Environmental Matters. The legislation itself is quite top-heavy. The details to come are when the bylaws and the articles of incorporation are developed, and this will give this authority, independent of the city or the county, the ability to issue bonds and generate other kinds of money to do resiliency projects like we're doing downtown with the city dock, and like sometime in the not too distant future we're going to have to do here in Eastport. And Eastport is a lot like several places in the county, Edgewood and Mayo and so forth, where sea level is already starting to become an issue. So that is still in the works, but is coming. And with that, I left almost a half hour. So if there are questions or continuations of conversation, or if people want to go out in the heat. Jess?
I just want to say, it's not a question, but just, I wanted to give a quick update on Eastport Elementary, if that's okay, and what's going on there, in case anyone has any questions. So, we have, if you've been by the school, you've seen that we built a 4-foot fence around the front part of the school along along Chesapeake and Fifth. And that is where we had an outdoor classroom there, and now we're going to be able to use the outdoor classrooms there, and we have 2 that are being built there, and we're really excited. We've been doing a lot of planning and having the kids get involved. If anyone likes to garden, we always welcome volunteers to come and help us and help teach the kids about gardening. And during the summer months, if anyone wants to help us with watering and stuff, we parents would appreciate it. We have had our permit approved to replace the existing chain link fence with a new fence that's going to match the new fence that's at the corner of Chesapeake and Fifth, and it also matches the fence across the street, so it's an aluminum fence, and so we're replacing that whole fence, and we're really excited about that. And we are working on a few smaller initiatives, and we are working with the school system to, if you saw when we put in the addition, we took out the historic and really great basketball court that has a lot of history in Eastport. They took that out and they replaced it with a new, smaller one that also happened to be on the first baseline, so it didn't work for anything. So we are working now. We've taken out the smaller one on the first baseline so that we can use the baseball field safely again, and are working with the school system on replacing it with a full-size basketball court that will be down along the new playground. If you haven't been to the new playground, please come out and visit it. We are always in need of volunteers in the summer, in the fall, in the winter, people to read, people to help in various things if you're interested. Eastport is a community school. It is literally a community school now. We have been designated by the state and the county as a community school, which means we're going to be doing a lot more food and social services within the school for our whole community, which we're really excited about. And if you know anyone who is in need of food this summer, we're not going to be offering, they won't be having food at the school as they have throughout the last year and a half. We're going to be having food 5 days a week at Blackwall Hitch, here at the fire station, and in front of the pool, in front of the LeRon Fisher pool, between 11:45 and I think it's 12:15 to 12:30 here. So LeRon Fisher is 12 to 12:15. So if you know anyone who is in need of food throughout the summer, it's going to be 5 days a week. So I think that's it, unless anyone has any questions about this week.
Thank you, Jess. Let me go to Hugh, then Barbara, and then Frida. Oh, I'm sorry.
When they're in front.
Oh. Bo.
Yeah. Hey, Ross, I know you work to be a fiscal hawk in the city, and it was in the paper that Rockville had fewer city employees than Annapolis, which has a 40% larger population. What is being done to right-size the city employees to be supported by the taxpayers? Because this imbalance, which has killed other cities around the country when these pensions come due, is Damocles' sword over our heads. So I'd like to know what's being done right now, because we talk about hiring more police, which I'm not opposed to, but maybe I support merging with Anne Arundel County and other areas where we can become the finest city in Annapolis, in the whole country, with the resources that we have, because we do have a finite amount of resources.
So 3 answers. First of all, Rockville is not a full-service city. They don't do their own fire. They do have a small police force, but they depend on county policing. Those are the 2 biggest spending items in the city, and they're the 2 biggest sources of employment in the city. Third is a distant third, Public Works. But that's the whole enchilada for us. But in the budget, we did 2 things. One, we called for a task force to look at possibilities of merging with or other forms of cooperation with the county that could reduce our costs. Now, it's not going to reduce spending or your tax bill, because a lot of that If the county's doing it instead of us, do you think they're going to do it for free? No, they're going to want us to pay for it. So you're largely there depending upon the county being more efficient than the city. And there's certainly reason to think, just because of economies of scale, the management over the size of their staff, that they could be more efficient. But the second thing that we did, and I think more importantly, and I was just talking to Dan Nataf about this, is we're going to be coming to the citizens with a survey. And we're going to be saying, we cannot, for example, the police and fire pension plan, that just increased by 35% of salaries, up to 35% of salaries. That's $82 million plan. I just had the pension board meeting this morning, and that's a lot of money. If we were in the state pension plan, instead of contributing 35% of salaries, we would be contributing 9.8. So there's some real reasons to think about changing that. Now there's a logistical problem, because as you put new people into the state plan, there's less people paying into our pension plan, and at some point we're going to hit a place where we're not going to have enough money to pay out the pensions that have been earned by our public safety people. But the survey will ask you not only how much you, actually there's a fourth thing, how much you want different services, but how much you're willing to pay for it. And we have a system called Open Government, which we bought as part of our accounting system, that'll actually allow you to play with the city budget, cut money here and cut money there, or increase taxes or decrease taxes. That's going to be a big effort, and I'm not sure we put enough money in. We put $50,000 in to do that survey. It's going to have to be a pretty sophisticated survey. But the notion is that that will be an ongoing survey. Things are not static. Citizens are not always the same, and they don't always have the same opinion. So we may need to be doing that on a regular basis. The last thing we're doing is something that the Financial Advisory Commission is working on, which is the spending affordability model that both the state and the county have, that look at the burden, the tax burden, relative to the population. And it's an empirical model and data-driven, and we want to see what that looks like for the city. I asked the finance department several years ago, 2014, to look at how much it costs to live in the city for the same house in the county. And at that time, 2014, city residents were paying $1,500 a year more in taxes and fees for the median price house, which at that time was $540,000, to live in the city versus that same house in the county. So there's no doubt we're paying a premium to live in the city. That's a matter of personal preference. I want to live in Annapolis, but there is a price to be paid. So, Frida.
If you recall, before COVID, we had a problem on the peninsula with coach buses dropping off their guests downtown and then coming to the peninsula and parking on the red curbs, idling for sometimes up to 4 hours. So in the meantime, since they didn't come last year, has anything been done to develop a plan for those coach buses to go somewhere else? And why is it the onus on the residents to call SP Plus for enforcement when we pay city taxes for their enforcement in Ward 1, but we don't have any enforcement here?
Right.
So is there a plan, and why can't we get better SP Plus enforcement?
Because we're not paying for it. And I talked to SP Plus. They come over here on a as available basis, but they don't have a contract to do that. Now, soon we won't have an SP Plus contract, but I told you, I asked them what they would ballpark that they would charge us to do the enforcement of residential parking, $150,000, which in the scheme of things may not be that bad a price if you actually had the license recognition cars that can read it and actually do enforcement. And enforcement, somebody in the audience mentioned, a couple people, enforcement is the #1 deficiency in the city. And when we don't do the enforcement, we might as well not pass the legislation because it has no meaning. I'll get to you, Paul, but I was going to do Barbara next. and I think I have Hugh on there too. But if we don't have enforcement, we really don't have anything. But if we're going to expect SP Plus to enforce parking here, we should pay them to do it, and we're not. So that's why sometimes they'll make a call, it'll take them 2 or 3 hours to get over here. I think there's two things going on. One, they do it catch as catch can. Two, I think they're hoping the problem will have moved on before they get there. Now, the buses is a different issue, and we are talking in our group with the city manager about that. And that is also an enforcement issue. They should not be. First of all, sometimes they pull up on the curb, which is totally illegal, and they should be getting ticketed for that. I think more onerous is sitting there for 4 hours running their engines. And there could be legislation. I think there is stuff on the books about not running when you're not moving, but again, it's not enforced. And the honest answer, Frida, and I know this is not a good thing, you're the one that sees it. And Michael Matthews and Jane Lawrence, all the people who see these infractions are the people who can call it in. SP Plus is not over here, the police are not over here monitoring. If you don't call it in, it's not going to be called in. It's just a simple fact.
Is there a rule that could be quoted to the driver that said, look, you move on per city ordinance code, whatever? Or I'm calling the police to the guy?
If they're on the curb or parking over red signs or things like that, yes. If they're, but for idling their engine, no, there's nothing on the books at this point.
If they're parking there for an hour or something like that on a city street?
As long as they're
Residential
licensed,
street.
as long as they're licensed, no. But if we had residential parking permits, then they couldn't be here. So, I mean, as I said earlier, you've got the status quo, and then you go all the way over to what is in place, the 5 parking districts in Ward 1.
So, I heard you mentioned, a parking district a couple times, and I'm a little confused. Does that mean parking permits for every house and everything like that?
Title
There's no way
12?
you could just say, like, the peninsula is a residential parking district, and these rules apply without going to permits?
Is actually-
Permits is a slippery slope too, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's also a slope that if it's not enforced, it doesn't mean anything. Title 12, Section 32 of the City Code is very explicit. If you want to establish another residential parking district, the citizens need to petition the Transportation Board. The Transportation Board will make a recommendation to the City Council, actually to the Transportation Committee, and if the Transportation Committee agrees that a district should be created, an ordinance has to be established. And if you go to that section of the code, Section 1232, you will see the parameters, the boundaries of the 5 existing parking districts. In a residential parking district, you will have to pay for your first 2 permits. I think it's $25 a year or something. It's nominal. But for the next 2 cars, you pay $150, and then for the fourth one, $100, for the third one, $50, and so on up the line. You also get a certain number of hang tags, so if you have a guest come and stay overnight, they can put a hang tag on their mirror. You get 10 of those. You need more, you have to pay for them. So there's a whole bureaucracy for residential parking districts laid out in the code. It may well be worth it. So Ward 1 seems to be relatively happy with it.
I wouldn't like it.
Well, I think there's a lot of people don't. I got some other people. I got to go to Barbara, then Hugh, then Paul.
So I just want to clarify one thing. Idling longer than 5 minutes is illegal in the state of Maryland, across the whole state. It is illegal for vehicles to idle longer than 5 minutes.
Okay.
So,
Thank you for coming. All right, it's Barbara.
Yeah. Frida, quickly. In work that Environmental Community's been doing on the comprehensive plan, we have gotten the planning and zoning staff to agree to include air quality as an issue, so that, I think of you, and we're doing that. And then secondly, in the broader scope, in the next decade, which is our time frame, we want to be pushing like hell to get electric vehicles. And I want those buses that are not electric, they have to park out in somebody's cow pasture, you know, and have little electric cars bring the folks in, you know, so we could do that. The question I had, I was just helping out in her. The question I have is a small question, but it's an environmental equity question. Once upon a time, there was the issue of the Wells Cove public access. And you got involved in that. And we have been promised by our dear mayor that he really is concerned. And he was going to do something about it. And nothing happened. And Jess had to file a writ of mandamus to try to get the damn city to do something. Well, here we are, and it would be perfect today if some folks have been able to get in their kayak and jump into Wells Cove and go splash it around because it's hot.
So I did something about it. I put into the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program, money to start planning for a dock to come out over top of the city's outfall for the storm drain. And that will be in planning, in Public Works, will be in planning this coming year, and hopefully construction will be beginning the year after that. In the meantime, there are legal concerns. Thank you. There are some legal concerns that are still being ironed out, but yeah, we will have that. Not only that, but that is an important part of, Wendy O'Sullivan is the head of the national parks for the Chesapeake region. And one of the things that she's doing is a map of all of the water access points in Annapolis. So when people come to Annapolis, which is the gateway to the bay, and Wells Cove is one of the public access points that is shown on that map. So it is becoming institutionalized and it's budgetized. Hugh, I think, and I'll get to you.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'd like to know, you keep talking about enforcement, and I want to go back to our concept of 24 empty spots. Those are funded every year, correct?
I'm sorry.
Those are funded every year, correct?
What?
They're funded. Those spots are funded.
For the police department, yes, yes.
At the end of the year, if those are not filled, does the city get that money back?
Well, if it's not used, it falls to fund balance, but it is used largely to pay all the overtime to the staff that are now doing.
What it sounds like to me is it's a slush fund for the police department because they have a staffing requirement. They are now using that staffing requirement they refuse to fill to cover their expenses. So they're using a slush fund. What mechanisms does the city have to pull that back and say, do your job, but man it up? That's money that we are spending that's being used. It's an additional money into the police department's budget. They're happy to have it.
So that's a good question. I don't think there is. It's appropriated. If it's not spent at the end of the year, it falls to fund balance. But
you're my deficit hawk. You need to take a look at that.
Yeah. No. So Hugh, could you send me an email, please? Yeah, please. I mean, that's very helpful. Paul, I think you were next.
Hello. I know it's late. We've gone over a lot of stuff. I've been a resident of Belcher Avenue for 30-some years. I'm well tuned into the issue with the Cove. I disagree with you. I'm well tuned into the issue with traffic and speeding. I've been dealing with that for years. I'm a veteran of meetings, commissions, boards, transition committees on parking and transportation, and spent 8 years working in the city's transportation department trying to improve a lot of these things. My first day at work, I sat down and I looked at all the studies that have ever been done about parking in the city. I'll wait till that cell phone gets off there.
It's your signal to go.
So, I'm a veteran of this whole thing. I've sat on transition committees, I've worked on bike planning committees, and I've worked, and nothing ever happens. I want to thank Cardi and her committee for trying to attack this again, but I want to tell you, 30, 40 years from now, someone else will come in and find that study covered in dust. Because every study I looked at was covered in dust, and no one ever looked back at them. And the issue, in my mind, I have to boil it down to the simplest thing. I'm going to ask everybody here tonight, without raising your hand, but I just want to find out, just want you to think about it. Did you drive here? Well, Rock and I walked here. Okay, we're not hero statuses because we did it, but that's our contribution. Solid, personal, individual, no government involvement. We're cut down on our driving. Every time we look at parking, it is always attacked. You're the economist. What's the one thing we all learn about economics, as Father Guido Sarducci said? A supply and a demand. We are always, always talking about supply. We need more parking spaces. We need more parking spaces. We need more parking spaces. Excuse me, that's BS. We have a demand issue. We demand too many parking spaces because there's too many cars. Some of us here have 2 or 3 cars in our households. You get where I'm coming at. We are the enemy. We can't complain about traffic. We are traffic. We built the Bay Bridge in '52 and then again in '72, and now we're talking about doing it again. And there's been more and more and more studies. The issue is driving. More cars, more miles, more people with cars, more cars per capita, and not enough what we call alternatives, but they aren't alternatives. They're options that we need to have in our toolbox. So until all of us take a good hard look at the issue of demand and the issue of too many cars, too many miles driven, we will never, ever, ever build our way out of this. Never, ever, ever. We're going to build a new garage. It's going to cost X. And then you got to pay to stripe it, paint it, plow it, clean it, light it, secure it, manage it for years and years and years to come. And we're taking the best real estate in the city and we're going to turn it into a multi-level parking garage yet again because we all think we need cars everywhere all the time. We're in a city with a colonial design. As Ross pointed out, we pay extra to live here. Let's enjoy it. Let's do what we can to limit cars severely. Excuse me, I never interrupted you or anyone else tonight. The question then, since you want to know, is what are you doing to drive less? What are all of us doing to drive less? What are all of us doing to build more resources for bicycling, for walking, making our streets safer in every way possible, and not wringing our hands yet again about parking for another study where leadership will not do anything to actually advance the goals of another study? That's my question.
So Paul, actually, you're raising a very good point, and we're looking at it, and we're looking at it on the basis of what happened during COVID when people weren't driving.
Absolutely.
And when people were not complaining about the boatyard parking lot being filled with tent and dining people instead of cars. Other municipalities are looking at this too. Bethesda has really questioned their requirements for parking with new applications, and they're sending applications back saying, you have too much parking here, you're going to attract too many cars to Bethesda, we already have too many cars. So I think your point has merit, and I think that we're starting to look at it. I do want to go back to the point that I thought Hugh was going to raise, which and you all should be raising, which is why don't we have enforcement? Why is there not enough staff to enforce the things that are already in place? And I'll tell you what the answer is. It's always the last thing on the budget block. And every year, the city manager, when they formulate the budget, tells the department, you are going to have to cut back. This year it was 3%. And the thing that goes is no more staff for enforcement. It's not a priority. It's not been a priority for management. And it is something that we have allowed to get away from us. And I think that it is something that really does need to be considered. As I've said, and you have said many times, you can have the best code in the world. If it isn't enforced, it's not code. So we are, I promised this lady, and then I will get to you, Katie, but yes, ma'am.
What is happening with universal mail-in ballots, and what is your position on it?
You mean universal in the country? I tell you,
No,
here in the city, we're going to do mail, the ballots are being mailed. In fact, you should have gotten something from the Board of Supervisors. I got mine this week about your mail-in ballot. Yeah. So we are having mail-in. There's been some controversy. There were questions about whether the Board of Supervisors of Election did it properly. I spent a good part of today investigating not only the city code, Title IV, but also the Charter, Article 2, Section 8. Not that I spent any time looking at this, but also the legislation. The council passed 2 pieces of legislation which did empower, thank you, empower the election board to make the decisions that they made. They did not make illegal or unfounded decisions. Now, I think there is a legitimate question about the number of people on the election board. 3 seems too small to me, and I think we're looking at, well, 2 because one of the people wasn't there. They had a quorum, but they made a change. But
wasn't there because it was a 2-hour notice before the meeting.
I'm not the election board. I have enough problems of my own. But what they did was legal. It was allowed per code, and the council.
It seems that's subject to question.
Well, that's fine, but I'm not the one to question. I think that's something that has to be taken up with the courts, to be quite frank. But as far as I can tell, Resolution 3520 was passed that allowed for mail-in ballots and
Under
to
a
contract.
state emergency, correct?
No, it's in the code, it's a permanent part of the code, that under.
Whether it's absentee
But
ballots or
last year,
mail-in
under
ballots.
duress, under a virus, was it not?
Last year, there was not voting for the city elections last year.
I know, so why did they vote on it to vote this year? Did they vote on it last year? Well, why?
The resolution that was passed last summer
Yes.
was to empower the election board to contract with the county board to run the elections and to do mail-in ballots. The ordinance that was passed earlier this year,
We're going to be able to vote physically plus mail-in ballots?
of course not. You can only vote once. And if you mail in your ballot, all right. So, Katie, you had a question.
Yes, I did. Most of you all probably don't know me, but my name is Katie George. I live here at Nautilus Point in Eastport. We represent about 1,500 residents of Eastport, sort of an unknown little group of folks along Americana Drive. My question has to do with budget. We talked a lot tonight about budget in different areas of city government. And I think the statement you made was when we pass the city budget. But as I'm remembering, you abstained from that final council vote, and I'm wondering if you could tell us why that served the residents of Ward A.
I would be happy to tell you. The budget, as I said in my statement at the council meeting when I cast my vote, was legally constructed and met all the conditions of Title VI in the code. I did not believe the budget was responsible because it didn't look forward to the impending structural deficit that we're going to be facing partially in fiscal '23. We're carrying over at least $2 million of ARPA money, and also traditionally we do have a surplus, so it won't hit us as hard in fiscal '23 because of the carryover one-time only monies, but it will be upon us in fiscal '24, and it does seem that we need to start now looking at ways we can reduce the budget. The only way I know to reduce the budget in any significant way is to reduce staff. That's 80% of our costs. And the only way to reduce staff is to reduce services. And that's why we're doing the survey, to ask you to go out to the citizens and ask, what surveys must you have and what surveys are you willing to no longer have? Let the private sector provide, and we'll see what that chucks up. But I could not vote for it because I didn't think we were being responsible. I couldn't vote against it because it was a legal budget. So I chose to abstain. And I chose to abstain on purpose to make a statement. Make a statement. I do not agree with this budget, but it is a legal budget. And I want to say on behalf of the administration, they really did do a good job of cutting spending within the existing set of services that we're providing. I think we also hired some new staff, which is questionable, but the budget was legally drawn and met all of the requirements of the code. I just don't think it was forward-looking and looking at the kinds of problems that we've got facing us down the road. I want to thank you. We went a little bit over, but I want to thank you for your participation. I think we're going to have to do these more frequently because clearly we can't get through all of the backlog. I did skip several, probably about 15 slides that I had some information on, but I didn't want to overburden your time. So, you're welcome.